Hey guys, tonight we dive into something that might seem mind-bending at first, but trust me, it's deeply fascinating. We're exploring how trees talk through underground networks. Yes, you heard that right. Forget those magical talking trees in fantasy stories or the glowing neural networks on alien planets in science fiction for a moment. We're going to peek behind the curtain of forest science and ecology, all the way into the hidden fungal networks and quiet conversations that rarely make it into textbooks in a way that truly makes sense. Can trees actually share information or even food with their neighbors? What happens when one tree gets sick or thirsty? Do others come to the rescue? Is there really a wood wide web beneath the forest floor, connecting everything? And could an entire forest actually behave like one giant, interconnected organism? Brace yourself for some mind-expanding and wonderfully intricate details. This won't be a dry lecture, but it will be fascinating. Before we dive into this scientific journey, take a moment to get comfortable. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a gentle fan or some soft background sound. And if you enjoy these late-night science explorations, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps me continue these journeys into the beautiful world of science. Feel free to let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing the global community gathered for these stories. Now, take a deep breath and relax. Let's ease into tonight's journey together, into the incredible world of tree communication, and uncover the beautiful details of how trees talk through underground networks, how it actually works. Imagine, for a moment, that you're standing in a dark, quiet forest late at night. The moonlight filters through a canopy of leaves high above, and the air is cool and still. All around you are towering trees, silent and seemingly motionless. You can hear the faint rustle of a breeze in the branches and perhaps the distant call of a night bird, but otherwise, it's peaceful and calm. Now, close your eyes and picture the ground beneath your feet. The forest floor is soft with moss and fallen leaves, and below that, rich, dark soil. It might feel like nothing more than dirt to us, but in that soil lies an immense secret. Beneath you, intertwined with the roots of all those trees, is an incredibly busy network of life and information that we humans barely notice. It turns out that the trees around you are not isolated, silent beings at all. They're actually whispering to each other in a language of scent and chemistry through channels hidden in the earth. Under the ground, threads of fungi connect one tree's roots to another, weaving a vast web that links nearly every tree in the forest. This is what scientists playfully call the wood wide web, an underground highway of fungal fibers that lets trees communicate and even trade resources. It sounds like fantasy, but it's very real and backed by science. So, in this peaceful nighttime forest scene, while everything appears tranquil, imagine that just below your feet there's a quiet conversation flowing as trees send messages back and forth at this very moment. Now, let's zoom in a little to the level of the soil, right where a tree's roots meet the earth. What exactly is connecting these trees? The answer is fungi. Those mysterious organisms of mushrooms and molds. But here we're not talking about the toadstools you see on the surface. We mean the vast, thread-like networks fungi form underground. These threads, called hyphae, are so small you'd need a microscope to see them, but they weave through the soil like an enormous net. When they encounter a tree's roots, something amazing happens. The fungus and the tree form a partnership. The fungal threads wrap around the finest tips of the roots and sometimes even grow inside them, creating a direct connection. This partnership is known as a mycorrhiza, a word literally meaning fungus root in Greek. Think of it as a gentle handshake between species under the ground. Interestingly, there are different styles to this fungus root embrace. Some fungi stay on the outside of the root cells, ensheathing the fine root tips like a glove. If you pulled up such a root, you might even see a fuzzy coating. That's the fungal partner wrapped around it. Other fungi actually slip between the root cells and even penetrate inside them, though gently. Under a microscope, in those cases, you'd see the fungal filaments branching inside the root's outer cells, forming tiny tree-shaped structures. In fact, scientists call those structures arbuscules, from the Latin for little trees. This interweaving maximizes the surface area for exchange. It's as if the fungus and tree are locking fingers at a microscopic level. In both arrangements, whether the fungus hugs the root from outside or weaves within, the effect is to vastly enlarge the tree's interface with the soil. It's like giving the tree millions of extra tiny rootlets that can absorb nutrients and water, courtesy of the fungus. And at those connection points, the trades we talked about can happen efficiently. The fungus hands over minerals, and the tree hands over sugars, each benefiting from the other. Through this mycorrhizal connection, the tree and the fungus start to trade with each other. Trees make food in their leaves using sunlight, sugars and carbohydrates through photosynthesis. They send some of those sugars down to their roots, and the fungal partner takes a share as payment. In return, the fungus forages through the soil for things the tree needs, like water and minerals such as nitrogen and phosphorus. The fungal threads are much thinner and more extensive than the tree's own roots, so they can reach nutrients and moisture in nooks and crannies that roots alone might miss. Essentially, the fungus becomes an extension of the tree's root system, vastly increasing its reach. If a tree's roots are like big highways branching through the soil, then the fungal hyphae are like countless little side roads and footpaths extending even further. Through these tiny threads, the fungus delivers vital nutrients and water back to the tree. It's a beautiful mutual aid agreement. The tree feeds the fungus, and the fungus waters and nourishes the tree. It's a win-win deal, a natural trade agreement carried out in silent biochemical language. Carbon-rich sugars flow one way, and nutrients flow the other, like a barter system running beneath the ground. And the fungus is exceptionally good at its job. It releases enzymes that break apart decaying organic material in the soil, unlocking nutrients in forms the tree roots alone might never access. Some fungi even exude mild acids that can dissolve tiny amounts of rock and sand, freeing mineral nutrients like phosphorus and calcium. In essence, the fungus acts as both a miner and a cook, mining raw elements from the earth and cooking or processing them into a form the tree can absorb. This is a big reason why trees with fungal partners often grow stronger and healthier than those without. This relationship isn't just a rare special case. It's the norm for most plants. Scientists estimate that around 90% of land plants have a mycorrhizal partner of some kind. Forest trees in particular are almost all connected to fungi. These fungal networks don't just stop at one tree either. The hyphae from a single fungus can connect to multiple trees at once, and a single tree can be linked to dozens of fungi. The result is a huge, interlinked web, like a giant underground tapestry woven of roots and fungus. In a way, if you could see beneath the forest floor, you would find that all the trees are holding hands through these fungal intermediaries. In simpler terms, the tree essentially gains a vast new root system by partnering with the fungus, and the fungus gains a steady food source by partnering with the tree. It's a bit like the tree saying, "You help me gather water and nutrients, and I'll pay you with sugar." And the fungus readily agrees. This way, both thrive better together than they would alone. The fungus can reach places the tree's roots can't, and the tree can provide more food than the fungus could ever make on its own. It's a beautiful synergy. To give you a sense of just how massive and fine-grained these networks can be, consider this. A single teaspoon of healthy forest soil can contain miles of fungal threads. Yes, miles, in just a teaspoon of soil. Let that sink in for a moment. Under each step you take in a forest, there could be hundreds of miles of mycelium, which is what we call the whole mass of fungal threads, twining around and connecting the roots beneath you. These hidden networks are sometimes nicknamed the Earth's natural internet because they can transmit so much information and resources across large distances. And they've been doing this long before humans ever invented electrical networks or the World Wide Web. In fact, fungal networks have existed for hundreds of millions of years, helping the first plants colonize land eons ago and continuing to support plant life today. Nature built its own communication and resource-sharing system, and it's been working quietly underfoot all this time. If you've ever walked in the woods and seen mushrooms sprouting from the ground or on rotting wood, you've seen the fruiting bodies of these underground fungi. Those toadstools and truffles are like the flowers or apples of a hidden tree, the mycelium. They produce spores, like seeds, to spread the fungus elsewhere. In fact, sometimes mushrooms appear in circles known as fairy rings. Often that's the edge of a single fungal network expanding outward beneath the grass or leaf litter. It's a visible hint of the invisible web below. So next time you spot a mushroom, realize that beneath it is a vast mycelial net likely connected to nearby roots, quietly facilitating the cycles of life. Now that we know about the physical network linking the trees, let's explore how trees actually use it. One of the most surprising things they do is share resources with one another. In a forest connected by a web of fungi, a tall, healthy tree with plenty of sugar might actually send some of its extra food through the network to a smaller, struggling tree. It sounds almost unbelievable. Why would one tree give away its hard-earned nutrients to help another? Yet that's exactly what can happen in a connected forest. Imagine a big old tree basking in the sunlight, producing more sugar than it needs at the moment. Nearby, beneath its canopy, a tiny seedling is trying to grow in the shade, not getting much sun at all. Through the underground fungal network, the big tree can pass some of its surplus nutrients to that little seedling, giving it a boost to stay alive. In essence, the larger tree is nurturing the young one, almost like a parent taking care of a child. This is why scientists often call the large, established trees mother trees. They act as central hubs in the network, capable of supporting younger trees around them. In fact, researchers discovered this phenomenon in a clever experiment. They introduced radioactive tracers, completely harmless to the trees, but detectable, into the sugar of certain trees to see where that sugar went. In one famous study, a scientist tagged a birch tree and a Douglas fir tree, two very different types of trees, with these markers. When the birch tree was bathed in sunlight, it produced lots of sugar, and some of that tagged sugar later showed up inside the fir tree nearby. The fir, which was in the birch's shade, was literally receiving food from its neighbor through the fungal connections. Later, as autumn came, and the birch lost its leaves, and thus could no longer make as much food, the flow reversed. The evergreen fir, still photosynthesizing, sent some nutrients back to the leafless birch. They were helping each other at different times of the year, each one giving a little when it had more than it needed. This kind of exchange was a revelation. It showed that trees of completely different species were not just competing for light and space. They were also cooperating in subtle ways, quietly bartering carbohydrates through the fungi beneath them. To visualize this cooperation between different species, imagine a sunny summer afternoon in a mixed forest. A paper birch tree stands in full leaf, its white bark gleaming in the light. Not far beneath its canopy, a young Douglas fir tree grows. The fir sits in the birch's shadow, enjoying cool shade but struggling to get enough sun for itself. During these bright summer months, the birch has energy to spare. Through the mycorrhizal network joining their roots, the birch passes some of its excess sugars to the Douglas fir. The fir, in turn, uses this gifted nourishment to keep its needles healthy despite the shade. They are two very different trees, yet underground. Their roots share a handshake via fungal threads. Now, time moves forward to autumn. The birch's leaves turn gold and then brown, and one by one they fall to the ground, leaving the birch bare and unable to produce food until next spring. The Douglas fir, however, is an evergreen. As temperatures drop and days shorten, it continues to photosynthesize, albeit slowly, through its green needles. And something remarkable happens. The flow in the network reverses. The Douglas fir now sends some of its surplus sugars into the mycorrhizal web, which delivers them to the birch. It is as if the fir says, "I've got you covered this season." The birch, thanks to the fir's contribution, heads into winter with a bit more reserve energy than it would have had alone. Through alternating seasons, these two species support each other. The birch helping the fir in summer, the fir helping the birch in autumn. Neither is conscious of this give and take, of course, but through the fungal network, they've developed a synergy. The forest, in effect, encourages such mutual aid because it benefits the community as a whole, ensuring that more trees survive to see the spring. Perhaps even more mind-blowing is that mother trees seem to recognize their own kin. Experiments suggest that an old tree can tell which young seedlings nearby are its offspring, its literal seedlings, and it will favor those baby trees with a greater share of nutrients. Picture that, a giant tree, through chemical and biological signals in the network, knowing which saplings sprang from its own acorns or cones, and giving them special attention. It's as if the tree is saying, "You're my family. I'll take care of you first." How exactly does a tree sense which seedlings are its kin? We aren't entirely sure. It could be through specific chemical signals in the roots or the unique way fungi connect them, but the result is clear. The mother tree, acting like a caring elder, sends extra food to its own progeny, increasing their chances of survival in the deep shade of the forest floor. Imagine, for instance, deep in a shadowy corner of a dense forest, a tiny fir seedling peeks above the leaf litter. The air is cool and thick with the scent of damp earth and old leaves. Hardly any direct light touches this little sprout. It lives in perpetual dusk under the green cathedral of its elder neighbors. By all rights, it shouldn't survive long. It can barely photosynthesize enough to feed itself. But this seedling is not as alone as it appears. Nearby towers a gigantic fir tree, centuries old. Let's call her the mother tree. Beneath the ground, the mother's roots extend outward, and fine fungal threads connect those roots to the little seedling's own root system. In the afternoon, the mother tree bathes in sunlight that the seedling cannot. The big tree's millions of needles churn out sugar from that sunlight, and some of that sugar travels down into her roots. Through the fungal network, a portion of that sweet energy finds its way into the seedling's roots. It's not a conscious gift, but it feels almost intentional. The mother tree is sending food to her offspring. Day after day, the seedling receives a subtle infusion of sugars and nutrients that it did not produce itself. Thanks to this support, the tiny fir manages to sprout a few more needles and grow another inch, even in deep shade. It remains weak by comparison to the giants around it, but it is alive, a quiet green spark nurtured by the unseen care of its parent. Seasons pass. The seedling endures where many others perished, sustained by the network. One summer, a storm blows through the forest, and a large gap opens in the canopy as an old tree falls. Sunlight floods the once dim corner. Now the little fir, no longer quite so little, is ready. It has a healthy root system entwined with fungi, a connection to a generous mother, and newly available light above. It surges upward, racing to fill the gap. In a few decades, that seedling becomes a young tree, strong and tall in its own right, and it owes its success largely to that early lifeline, the quiet, underground flow of nourishment from mother to child. Without any fanfare, the network ensured that life continued, bridging generations of trees with threads of shared sustenance. Trees don't only share with their own species or family. Through the fungal web, resources can move between very different trees, as we saw with the birch and fir. Nutrients might flow from a strong maple to a weaker oak, or from a cluster of healthy trees to a sick neighbor. In this way, the forest can be somewhat egalitarian, buffering extreme ups and downs. If one area has plenty of water and another is dry, the mycorrhizal network could even redistribute some of that water. In times of drought, big, deep-rooted trees might pull up water from deep soil, and via their fungal partners, share a bit of that moisture with shallower-rooted trees nearby. It's not a fast or intentional process like humans hauling buckets of water, but over weeks and months, the network can even out some disparities. The result is that all trees in the network have a better chance of making it through tough times than they would alone. It's like a community pantry or mutual aid society where the haves quietly lend a hand to the have-nots. A striking example of how far this sharing can go was the discovery of living tree stumps being kept alive by their neighbors. Normally, if you cut a tree down, leaving just the stump, you'd expect that stump to wither and die, since it can no longer produce food without leaves. But foresters and scientists have found stumps, just circles of wood on the forest floor with no branches or green leaves, that are still alive, even years after the tree was cut. How could that be? It turns out their roots had fused with those of nearby trees, or were still connected via fungi, and the surrounding trees were pumping water and nutrients into the stump to keep it alive. Essentially, the remaining living trees treated that stump like an injured friend, sustaining it with their own sugars and water. One famous case in New Zealand involved a kauri stump that should have been long dead, yet it had living tissue and sap flowing, all because it was linked to a network of healthy trees around it. This finding astonished researchers and changed how we think about forest communities. It suggests that in a forest, individual trees might function more like parts of a larger whole. The stump was no longer an independent tree, but more like an organ kept alive by the forest around it. In a very real sense, the forest behaves like a single, interconnected organism, a superorganism, rather than just a collection of separate trees. Picture that stump. Its outer wood might be dry, cracked, and covered in emerald moss, perhaps ringed by little mushroom shelves. Yet beneath that weathered exterior, it's surprisingly alive. If you could peer inside or touch its base, you might find it moist and green, with sap still subtly flowing. That's evidence of life being pumped in from its neighbors. It's almost beyond belief. Let that sink in for a moment. A tree stump, essentially a severed limb of the forest, kept alive by the care of its community around it. Why would trees do this? Why share resources or keep a stump alive? After all, evolution is often portrayed as survival of the fittest, each organism for itself. The truth is, cooperation can be incredibly beneficial in nature. By supporting neighbors, especially those of their own species or even their own offspring, trees ensure the resilience and survival of their community. A forest of only a few winners and many struggling losers wouldn't be as stable as one where resources circulate to where they're needed. Also, the fungi in the network have their own stake in this system. It's in the fungus's interest to keep all its host trees alive and well, because if a tree dies, the fungus loses a source of food. In a sense, the fungal network is like a wise manager, redistributing resources to keep its clients, the trees, healthy. One could imagine carbon as currency in this underground economy, and nutrients as the goods being traded. The mycorrhizal fungus is like a savvy broker or merchant, hooking up a tree rich in sugars with another part of the network rich in, say, phosphorus, and ensuring both sides benefit, while taking a small cut for itself in the form of sugar. Through countless transactions like these, the forest as a whole stays in balance. What looks like altruism is really a system where everyone wins by sharing. Of course, none of this cooperation is conscious or intentional in the way we think of human kindness. Trees aren't deciding to be generous, and fungi aren't altruistic overseers. Instead, through millions of years of interdependence, those that formed these mutualistic relationships tended to survive and spread, while those that didn't missed out. The result is an evolutionary arms around shoulders. By each species following its own needs and signals, they've knitted themselves into a collaborative network as if guided by design. In any case, the outcome is a more connected, cooperative community, where, in times of need, trees can rely on their neighbors and fungal middlemen for support. It's a heartwarming thought. In the stillness of the forest, there is caring and sharing happening on a scale we hardly imagined until recently. In another part of the forest stands an ancient beech tree. For hundreds of years, it has grown tall and strong, but now its crown is thinning, its bark peeling, and a few mushroom conchs protruding like shelves from its trunk. Perhaps a lightning strike damaged it, or wood-boring beetles have invaded its heartwood. The old beech is dying. Over one harsh summer, its leaves wilt, and it can no longer produce the food it needs. Rather than hoarding what little remains, the beech begins to release its stored nutrients down into its roots. Through the tangled fungal network that it has been connected to all its life, those nutrients flow outward. Neighboring trees, some of them its own offspring growing nearby, receive a sudden pulse of extra phosphorus and nitrogen, like a final gift. The dying beech, in its last act, is feeding the community. Within a year, the great beech finally falls, its life ended. One calm morning, with a groan and a thunderous crack, the great beech finally snaps at the base and comes crashing down to the ground. Its long life ended in an instant. But it does not leave the forest impoverished. New saplings spring up in the clearing, nourished in part by the nutrients the old giant relinquished as it died. In a way, the beech lives on in those youngsters. Its decaying wood also becomes food for fungi and microbes, which in turn support the next generation of plants. Above ground, the death of a tree can look like an isolated event, a silent collapse. But underground, it can be an act of sharing, a redistribution of life's building blocks to friends and family. It's a poetic image, a tree, feeling the fading of its own light, quietly whispering its strength into the network so that others might live on stronger. And remarkably, scientists have found hints that this really happens. Using isotopes, they've observed dying trees passing their carbon to their neighbors through the fungal highways. What a graceful exit strategy by the forest, turning an end into a new beginning for others. Let's drift into another fascinating aspect of this underground network. It's not just about food and water. It can also carry information. In a sense, trees talk to each other through these fungal connections. Not in words, of course, but in chemical signals. Imagine a scenario. A horde of hungry caterpillars descends on one tree, chewing away at its leaves. The attack is nearly silent, but merciless. Only the soft munching and occasional plop of caterpillar frass break the stillness. Within days, half the oak's canopy is ragged, leaves skeletonized into lace and falling in tatters. The attacked tree needs to warn its neighbors that a threat is at hand. So, what does it do? It releases certain distress chemicals from its roots into the mycorrhizal network. The fungus acts like a telephone line, transmitting the alarm to other trees connected to the network. Nearby trees receive the chemical SOS and start ramping up their defenses. They might pump extra bitter or toxic compounds into their leaves to make them less appetizing to the insects, or strengthen their immune responses against disease. Essentially, the trees are communicating. One cries out, "I'm under attack," and the others hear it and prepare to fight the same enemy. Now imagine a few days later, those caterpillars finish off the first tree's leaves and move toward one of the warned neighbors. When they arrive, they're in for a surprise. Instead of tender, fresh leaves, they encounter leaves filled with bitter chemicals and defensive toxins. It's like biting into a terribly bitter salad, not at all what the caterpillars hoped for. Many of them turn away and look elsewhere, their appetite foiled by the tree's advanced preparation. In this way, the quiet alarm system beneath the soil can actually save a tree from severe damage by giving it a chance to be less appetizing when trouble comes knocking. Scientists have observed this kind of underground warning system in action. In experiments, when one tree or plant was infested by pests or infected by a disease, neighboring plants connected to it through mycorrhizal fungi started activating their defense genes and chemical arsenals much sooner than they would have by chance. It's as if they got a heads up about the problem. Meanwhile, similar trees that were not connected to the network didn't get the early warning and remained defenseless until the threat reached them directly. This shows that the fungal web can function like an information highway, allowing trees to share news of trouble. They send distress signals about drought, disease, or insect attacks, and other trees alter their behavior when they receive these messages. One tree's problem becomes the whole community's awareness, giving them a better chance to collectively withstand whatever is coming. It's interesting to note that trees have both wired and wireless communication methods. The fungal network is like a wired telephone system or the internet, a direct line connecting individuals. But trees can also broadcast messages in a wireless way by releasing chemical signals into the air. For example, some trees under attack by insects emit gases, volatile organic compounds that drift through the air and warn distant trees, sort of like sending a scent-based radio signal. One famous example of wireless tree talk comes from Africa. On the savanna, when giraffes begin chewing on the leaves of acacia trees, those acacias release a distress gas, ethylene, into the air. Downwind, other acacia trees smell this warning and swiftly pump bitter toxins into their leaves, Within minutes, their foliage becomes much less tasty. Giraffes, being clever, have learned this and will often walk in the opposite direction of the wind or travel a distance before eating from the next tree. So they find trees that haven't gotten the warning. It's a dramatic illustration of plants communicating through the air. However, as mentioned, airborne messages can be hit or miss. Only trees downwind might receive them, and the signal can dissipate. The underground network, on the other hand, is more targeted and reliable, delivering the message through root-to-root fungal links no matter which way the wind is blowing. Many times, trees use both methods in concert. A distressed tree pumps signals into the air and the soil simultaneously, ensuring the warning spreads to as many neighbors as possible. It's a truly ingenious survival strategy, a silent alarm system humming beneath the forest floor. Think of this communication network as the forest's immune system. Just like our body sends signals to rally immune cells when a part is injured or infected, the forest uses the mycorrhizal web to rally defenses when one of its members is threatened. The speed is different. Plant communication is slower and more diffuse than nerves in an animal body. But the principle is similar. The more connected the forest, the more it can respond as a unified entity to challenges like insect plagues or blights. This cooperation doesn't mean that trees won't still suffer. Many might still be eaten or infected, but it can reduce the damage by preparing neighbors to resist or at least not be caught completely off guard. The reality might be even more extraordinary than the scenarios we've discussed. Scientists are starting to find hints that the fungal networks themselves could be processing information in ways we never imagined. There's evidence that fungi can transmit electrical impulses along their hyphae, somewhat analogous to how nerves carry signals in animals. In one study, researchers detected patterns of electrical spiking in fungal networks and found that these patterns changed when the fungus encountered new sources of food or faced damage. Some have even likened it to a kind of language, with certain pulse patterns that could be considered words, conveying specific information. Who knows? Perhaps one day, we will learn how to eavesdrop on these electrical whispers in the wood wide web and interpret the language of the forest in a way we can truly understand. It's still very early research, but imagine, the fungi not only ferry messages for the trees, but might also be chatting among themselves or acting as interpreters, deciding what to pass on. It's a bit speculative, but truly mind-bending to consider that an entire forest might have something akin to a neural network within it, with the fungi as the neurons linking tree to tree. We are only scratching the surface of understanding these phenomena, but each discovery makes the forest seem even more alive and enigmatic than we thought. However, just like any community or any network, not everything in the wood wide web is friendly cooperation. There are cheaters and even outright villains in this underground world. Some plants take advantage of the network, stealing resources without giving back. A classic example is the ghost pipe, also known as Indian pipe. This strange plant looks like a waxy white pipe or candlestick emerging from the forest floor, almost like a ghost of a plant. Because it has no chlorophyll, it's bone white. It can't photosynthesize at all. Not a single ray of sunshine feeds it. So how does it survive? The ghost pipe plugs into the mycorrhizal network and basically tricks the fungi and nearby trees into supplying it with nutrients. It's a freeloading guest at the dinner table of the forest, feasting on the food that other green plants worked hard to produce. Many orchids, too, especially when they're just seeds or tiny sprouts, steal from fungal networks until they grow big enough to produce their own food. These plants are the silent thieves of the forest, tapping the network for a free meal before eventually, when they can finally photosynthesize, joining the community in earnest. Then there are the bullies. Certain trees themselves can use underground connections to sabotage rivals. The black walnut tree, for instance, exudes a chemical called juglone that is toxic to many other plants. This toxin can seep through the soil, carried by water, and perhaps even along fungal networks, to reach neighboring plants and harm them. It's like a form of chemical warfare. The walnut is effectively poisoning the ground around it to ward off competition. Any plant that isn't resistant to juglone will wither if it's too close. So, while one part of the forest network might be sharing nourishment and information, another part might be delivering poison to unwitting victims. Human actions can also introduce troublemakers. Some invasive plant species have learned how to manipulate these relationships to their advantage. Take garlic mustard, an invasive weed in many forests. It releases compounds that kill or suppress mycorrhizal fungi in the soil. By doing so, it essentially cuts the communication and supply lines for native plants, weakening them, while garlic mustard itself, which doesn't rely on those fungi as much, takes over. It's a devious strategy. By wrecking the underground network that native trees and plants depend on, the invader gains a foothold. This shows us how crucial the fungal network is to plant health. When it's disrupted, the whole community can suffer. So, the Wood Wide Web carries both help and harm, much like the human internet does. It's a tool that can be used for cooperation, eavesdropping, or conflict depending on the players involved. A forest is not a utopia of universal kindness. It's a dynamic system where both collaboration and competition play out in complex ways. There are generous exchanges and cunning exploits happening simultaneously. Still, the very existence of such an intricate support network is astonishing. It means that no tree in a forest is truly an island unto itself. Even competition is woven into a larger tapestry of connection. Overall, the dominant theme in a healthy, thriving forest is one of balance and interdependence, a kind of peaceful equilibrium where, for the most part, trees, fungi, and other organisms coexist in a mutually supportive web of life. Up to now, we've been focusing mostly on what's happening in a single forest, perhaps the woods near your home or the classic temperate forest in our imaginations. But let's zoom out to the bigger picture. These underground networks are virtually everywhere plants are found, from the deepest rainforests to the northern boreal woods, from prairies to deserts. The specific fungi and plants differ from place to place, but the symbiosis is a common thread across ecosystems. In a lush tropical rainforest, for instance, the soil is teeming with mycorrhizal fungi linking countless tree species in an incredibly complex web. A single giant rainforest tree might be connected to dozens of other trees and understory plants through a labyrinth of fungal partners. It's a big part of how such forests sustain their tremendous biodiversity. Nutrients can cycle more efficiently and even get shared between very different species. In the northern pine and birch forests, a different set of fungi prevails, but they too weave a network that knits the forest together. Even in seemingly sparse landscapes like savannas, where trees are spread out, underground fungi connect the grasses and acacia trees, helping the ecosystem cope with drought and poor soils. In the Arctic tundra, tiny shrubs rely on fungal friends to eke out a living in frozen ground during the brief summer. And yes, even in deserts, hardy shrubs and cacti can have mycorrhizal fungi assisting them, quietly sharing whatever little water and nutrients exist beneath the sand. It's humbling to realize that under every forest and field, beneath our farms and gardens, there's this hidden infrastructure of life. We walk and build on it every day without seeing it, but it's there, upholding the green world around us. One way to appreciate just how expansive these networks can be is to consider record breakers. Earlier, we marveled at miles of mycelium in a teaspoon of soil. Now consider an entire forest. In Oregon, USA, scientists discovered a single fungus, a honey mushroom species, that spans about 3.5 square miles of forest and is estimated to be well over 2,000 years old. That's around 9 square kilometers, or roughly 1,600 football fields put together. All one organism. It's been nicknamed the humongous fungus. Now, in that case, it's a parasitic fungus that actually causes disease in trees, not the benevolent partner we've been mostly talking about. But its sheer size gives a clue to what fungal networks are capable of. If a single fungus can be that large, imagine the combined network of friendly mycorrhizal fungi under a thriving forest. It's like an entire planet of connections beneath the ground. We could have multiple huge fungi entangled, each linking numerous trees in their domain, overlapping with others. It's mind-boggling and heart-stirring to think about. Scientists have even begun mapping these hidden networks on a global scale. In one ambitious project, researchers compiled data from over 1 million trees and forests around the world to predict where mycorrhizal networks are flourishing. They found that certain types of fungal partnerships dominate in different regions. For example, in temperate and boreal forests, fungi that form sheaths around roots, ectomycorrhizae, are common, whereas in tropical forests and grasslands, microscopic fungi that penetrate root cells, arbuscular mycorrhizae, prevail. By feeding all this data into computer models, the scientists created a kind of world map of the wood wide web. It was like revealing the Earth's invisible neural network beneath the ground. This map, they said, is akin to an MRI of the planet's ecosystems, showing how these symbiotic relationships influence everything from soil health to climate. The takeaway is profound. These networks are everywhere, adapting to local conditions, yet serving a universal purpose of connecting life. No matter the continent or climate, if you have plants, chances are high you have a fungal network helping them behind the scenes. It's a planetary phenomenon, tying the living world together across space and time. Now, let's take a little imaginative journey. Picture yourself shrinking down to the size of a tiny insect, or even a single cell, and venturing below the soil's surface. The darkness envelops you, but you find yourself in a dense tangle of structures. Thick, woody roots, as large as highways, stretch out from tree bases, narrowing into smaller and smaller rootlets that probe the soil. Twining around those roots are glistening strands of fungus, so thin and transparent they're like silken threads illuminated by the faint glow of biochemical reactions. You move through this maze, following a particular fungal filament as if it were a road. You pass under a vast root of an oak and come across a junction where fungal threads from different directions converge at a root tip, forming a kind of fungal root marketplace. Here, nutrients are exchanged. You can almost sense the bustle of activity. Phosphorus and nitrogen handed over to the root, sugar molecules handed back to the fungus. You hitch a ride on a quick-flowing stream of sugar traveling along a hypha into the distance. Eventually, you emerge at another root, this one belonging to a birch tree. You've just traveled, like a tiny courier, from an oak to a birch through the fungal network, seeing how two different trees can be connected by a third-party fungus. If you continued this journey, you could visit the entire forest in time, moving from one tree to the next, the fungus acting as your guide. It's like discovering an enchanted subterranean city, one that has always been there, operating in the shadows while the trees above stand silently. This perspective, seeing the forest as an interconnected community, is relatively new to science, though it might feel intuitively true to nature lovers. For a long time, ecologists and foresters viewed trees mostly as competitors, each fighting for sunlight, water, and nutrients in a Darwinian struggle. That is certainly part of the story, but now we know it's not the whole story. The discovery of the Wood Wide Web has shifted that perspective. There were pioneers in the scientific community who suspected these connections existed. In the 1980s and 90s, a few researchers began to piece together hints. A living stump here, a nutrient transfer there, unusual patterns of seedling survival around big trees. One of them, Suzanne Simard, grew up in the forests of British Columbia and had a hunch that the big trees were nurturing the little ones. When she first presented her ideas that trees could be sharing resources underground, many were skeptical, even dismissive. It sounded a bit like fantasy. But she persevered and conducted rigorous experiments. She traced the flow of carbon between trees using isotopes and mapped out fungal connections. Her groundbreaking work, published in the late 1990s, provided concrete evidence that stunned the scientific world. It showed that fir and birch trees were indeed swapping nutrients via fungal links. Over the years, more and more studies backed up and expanded these findings, and what was once a fringe idea became almost common knowledge among biologists. Now, we no longer think of trees as disconnected sticks in the ground. We understand them as part of a living, communicating network. This changing understanding also affects how we humans relate to forests. Knowing that trees help each other and communicate subtly makes a walk in the woods feel different, richer, almost aware. Interestingly, many indigenous cultures around the world have long regarded forests as family networks of living beings. They would speak of trees as our relatives or believe that a great spirit linked all the trees together. Such perspectives, often passed off as poetic or spiritual, resonate strongly with what we are now learning scientifically. It's as if modern research is finally catching up to ancient wisdom, confirming that the forest truly is an interwoven community where each part depends on the others. It gives a whole new appreciation for those age-old teachings that emphasized respect and kinship with the natural world. Many people find it comforting or inspiring to think of forests as communities that take care of their own. It also teaches us something profound about cooperation. We often emphasize competition in nature, but here, right beneath our feet, is a powerful example of how cooperation is woven into the fabric of life. Trees and fungi have been cooperating for mutual survival for eons. Trees of different species, too, can cooperate when it benefits them collectively. The whole ecosystem is intertwined in a give-and-take relationship. And this isn't just touchy-feely talk. It has practical implications. Forest managers now consider fungal networks when they plan logging or replanting. Some suggest leaving mother trees standing when harvesting timber, so they can keep nurturing the new generation of saplings through the network. They know that if you yank out every tree, you break the web, and the next generation may struggle without that support system. Gardeners and farmers are also getting on board, using mycorrhizal fungi inoculants in soils to help crops or orchard trees grow better. In fact, there are initiatives now to inoculate soils with beneficial fungi, whether in ecological restoration projects or in home gardens. If we intend to replant a clear-cut forest, some foresters propose adding back native fungal spores to jumpstart the network for the next generation of trees. It turns out that conserving a forest is not just about preserving the trees, but also the hidden web that connects them. As we come to the end of our journey, let's quietly recap the wonders we've encountered. We've learned that trees are not lonely individuals, but parts of a grand, connected community. We uncovered how they share resources, passing sugars and nutrients back and forth through the underworld of fungi. We've witnessed how they warn each other of dangers, sending alarm signals through roots and mycelium to help neighbors mount defenses. We marveled at the discovery that big, old mother trees nurture young seedlings, and even in death, trees may donate their remaining energy to their neighbors. We saw cunning orchids and ghostly plants sneak into this network, and strong trees like the walnut turning the network into a battleground. We traveled beneath the soil in our imagination, seeing a whole world alive with activity where none is visible from above. And we realized that this hidden social network of trees and fungi stretches across entire landscapes, quietly keeping the forest healthy and vibrant. Next time you find yourself in a quiet grove of trees, take a moment to appreciate the silence under a new light. Beneath that silence is subtle conversation. The trees may not have voices, but they are communicating all the same, via whispers of chemistry and the mutual embrace of roots and fungi. Stand by a large old tree and consider that it might be a hub of information and nourishment, a grand old mother or father of the forest connected to everything around it. Consider that the scent of the soil, that rich, earthy smell, is partly the smell of billions of fungal threads at work. The forest is alive in more ways than one. Its life not just in each trunk and leaf, but in the connections that bind them. I find something profoundly calming about this realization. In a world that often seems defined by competition and noise, the trees show us a different way. A quieter, cooperative existence, where beings support each other simply because that is how the system thrives. It's a gentle lesson in empathy and interdependence, written quietly in the language of nature. And incredibly, we've only just begun decoding that language. There are undoubtedly more secrets waiting under the moss and humus, more wonders about how trees and fungi coordinate, and perhaps even more surprises about the complexity of their communication. But even what we know now is enough to transform how we feel in the forest. There's a thought that gently emerges from all this. In a sense, a forest works a bit like a living being on its own. Not a being with a single mind, of course, but a coordinated system where each tree and fungus acts somewhat like a cell in a larger organism. Information flows, resources circulate, and the forest as a whole responds to challenges like droughts or pests. Some scientists have mused that this is a kind of collective intelligence. Not intelligence as we know it in animals, but an evolved, distributed sensibility. When one part of the forest needs something, other parts often adjust, almost as if the forest is self-regulating. It's a breathtaking idea that a forest could be, in a very real way, a form of life beyond just the individual trees. Perhaps it's no wonder that standing in an old-growth forest, people often feel a presence or a wisdom in the air. While science is still unraveling these mysteries, it does seem that forests have their own sort of wisdom, a quiet, shared knowledge woven together by the fungi and roots, refined over millennia. It's not magic. It's the emergent property of many lives intertwined. But to an awestruck observer, the effect is the same. A feeling that the forest is whispering secrets, if only we knew how to listen. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, imagine that peaceful forest again. The moonlight is touching the treetops, the air is cool, and all seems still. Yet now you know that under the ground, an entire world is awake and bustling in slow motion, trees sending nutrients and signals, fungi ferrying messages and meals, a whole community caring and conversing in the dark. It's a comforting thought. The woods are not lonely. They are family. In the grand scheme of things, we too are part of nature's networks, exchanging our breath with the trees, connected in ways we often forget. There's a sense of belonging in that realization, a sense that we are never truly alone on this planet. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the hidden wonders of tree communication. I hope this exploration left you with a bit of awe and tranquility. The next time you see a stand of trees or even a humble houseplant, remember that there's so much more going on than meets the eye, and that knowledge itself can be a source of calm and wonder. Connected, cooperative, resilient. That's the hidden life of the forest, humming beneath our feet. Now, it's time to rest. Take a final deep breath, letting the knowledge and the calm of the forest settle in your mind. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the whispering of leaves and the wonder of the forest's hidden networks. Good night and pleasant dreams.